It was a period of time of essentially looking for what is this life all about and how can I experience and express a life of purpose and a life of some kind of meaning and significance, and how can I experience that? I think I wanted both to be of service and I wanted to experience a life that meant something to me. So it was sort of this like existential Saturn returns period of time, and it came that way. It wasn't quite so little. I mean, I think many midwives have the story of like, it's sort of a calling, and I feel like I landed in it. I was young, and then I have spent the rest of this time, or this part of my life, actually becoming a midwife. You know, I started and trained pretty quickly, actually. I left San Francisco at the time. I went to Maternidad La Luz, trained quickly in that period of time, attended several hundred births. I like to talk about it as if like I learned the foundation of midwifery at that period of time. Like you learn what the textbooks can teach. I learned from other midwives. I learned from witnessing and watching birth. And then I've spent the next decade and a half or so learning the artistry of midwifery. Like, what does it actually mean to be a midwife, and how do you really meet individual people and hear their stories and extract their stories and meet them in their process of becoming, and all along the way has been my own process of becoming too. CPM is a certified professional midwife. It's a national certification. An LM is issued by the state of California, the Medical Board of California. So you need both to practice in the state of California. I think that for me, as the years go on, it's not that there's an irreverence to the license or the work that people have done to get it, but I have so much more of an affinity for the title of being a midwife, because I feel like for me, being a midwife is being a keeper of ancient medicine, and it doesn't have very much at all to do with what California or the licensing board or the medical board think of it. It's so much older than that. And that's where I actually feel the roots and continue to return to and feel like I practice from. And so yes, I have a license and I'm grateful for it, and for all of the women before me who have worked to make it something that is available to us. But when I actually really sit down and I'm like, where do I think midwifery comes from, and how do I feel it in myself, and what kind of midwifery do I want to practice, it's something that is much, much older than anything that's been licensed. And my entire practice is based on keeping birth out of the hospital. I mean, there are times where there's something that she needs or something that we need, and so there are transfers from home to hospital, but I don't intend ever to go to the hospital, and I don't have hospital privileges. Women come to midwifery care for all kinds of reasons, but most are looking for a return to birth in its most essential form and its most essential state. So when we compare midwifery to obstetrical practice, they're really actually like different dimensions. I'm like, they're just completely different paradigms and entirely different ways of looking at and considering how we tend to take care of women's families and babies. And so the root of midwifery practice, as I understand it and know it, is that we're returning to what is cellularly coded in women, like what women know already how to do. And many of us need to remember this. It's like we need to remove the pieces, the places that are on top of that distract us from that knowing. And I feel like that's a lot of what prenatal care is. It's removing the noise around like reasons to be afraid of birth, or reasons why you might not be able to do this, or reasons why it might be too painful, or reasons you might want to medicate it. And moving, and like if we move all of that away, what does she know to be true, and what does she feel to be true, and really sitting on that and instilling and finding that source of power, choosing the obstetrical realm, or the obstetrical realm is by default. There's this inherent way where they're like, we know better than you. We know better, we're going to tell you. And that is incredibly disorienting and disempowering, and ultimately I feel like it's part of systemic oppression, to be truthful, around why it is that we don't feel fully connected to ourselves and we don't feel fully embodied and aren't able to birth from those places. So the difference being, it's based in choice and informed choice, and making those choices, wanting to make those choices, accessing a place of confidence in making choice, and then moving forward with belief in and trust in how birth is going to move through the body and what it's going to show and reveal, and in her capacity to show up for that event of her life and then integrate it afterwards. I think the other piece that's really missing, like obstetrics sort of thinks about like the moment of birth. I feel like midwifery care looks at all of the readying, like the walking towards the actual labor and birth, the labor and birth itself, the immediate moments of meeting the baby. And then there's all of these weeks afterwards, and all of that is midwifery care. I think that so much of being a midwife is sort of being a guide, and it's also really gently kind of poking at the places. I mean, I think that there's a certain resonance, right? So people come in and there's that chemistry of just like, she wants to be doing the work. So she's coming in already with her own things that are kind of bubbling up, and it's just, how do we work with it? I have curated over the years is kind of like, and it's very loose, but a framework of and places that we go prenatally, like the questions, the sort of thematics that I want to touch on. And so I move through those in a really loose kind of way. I give information, not homework assignments per se, but like, think about this between now and when I see you in a month. And I really like different ways of getting into the material that's beyond what we can just like think about and speak to. And so I always provide information on like, how can you use writing as a way in, as a doorway in, and breath as a doorway in, and using art as a doorway in, and movement with your body. And so we start kind of exactly where she's at, and then as things come up, offer resources. And I give a reader too of things that I'm like, I don't want you on Google, but these are things that I really like you to read, as a place to start, and then more, and speaking to around like, we want to sate your intellect. I want you to feel satisfied in your own knowing, but also if you read nothing, that's okay too. Like, you could really feel your entire way through this, and that might be just right and totally proper. Like, we don't birth from our brains, so we don't really need to stimulate them that much. We just need them to feel sort of quenched in the process of accessing enough information to make choices as we move. There's this space for this full spectrum of her experience and the duration of it. It's like not just the birth at all, as we know. It's like there's so much leading up to it, and for so much excavating and healing to do in the process of readying to become a mother, to feel good in that seat as a mother in our society and in her community. There's so much more birth imagery that's available to people now through Instagram or through social media. Like, people are publishing their births, and we even had a pretty righteous experience with this particular wall where women had been able to reflect afterwards, like, the way that this looks so radiant and glorious, and like that they didn't feel that way when they birthed. And I think that it's this really interesting point to be making, because imagery it's just a layer of what's actually happening. It's a snapshot in time, and some of the imagery can make it seem like, oh, I'm supposed to like feel really graceful or peaceful or at ease. I'm like, yeah, but there's also this place for like crawling around on the floor and like spitting if you need to, like birth can look so many different ways. Let's make sure we're representing all of the ways that it can look. Like, you don't need to be serene and peaceful. You might be, but if you're not, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. There's lots of ways that we get babies out of our bodies, and they're all okay. there's so many layers to the fear piece of it in terms of, the impact of technology, the sort of pressure or idea that that technology and pregnancy have been sort of normalized, that this is just something that you do. And so I think I love when women walk in the door early enough, because we really get to debunk that myth and be like, no, actually, this isn't something that everyone does. This is a choice that you have to make, and these are the reasons why you might choose it. These are the reasons why you might not choose it. There can be this misunderstanding too of like, oh, fear is going to get in my way when I birth. And I'm like, well, unconscious fear, maybe, and fear that we don't talk about, but fear that you lay out there and you're like, this feels real and raw, and like, I'm noticing that I'm having a response to it, and we look at it and know how to harness it, that not setting anyone up for some expectation, like you need to walk towards birth and be fearless, because I actually think that's not totally proper either. It's exactly. Like, if your eyes are wide open as you walk towards birth, some fear is okay. Like it is a real marked transformative event, and what we call fear is a proper response to that kind of event in your life. It's called anticipatory experience, anticipatory energy. And so giving the space to be like, well, name them. Like, what are those fears? And let's look at them, and then let's get the energy of them, and you can do it anyway with those fears right there, kind of like as part of your toolkit. In this city, San Francisco, less than 1% of families are choosing birth in this particular way. And so we know that there is work to do. We know that there is a lot of room for figuring how to move through oppressive systemic fear that's making it such that many can't even choose this for themselves. I think that's a little bit of a larger conversation. There's the working with fear within the practice itself, and then there's like the big gnarly fear that keeps people from even walking in the door, because the idea of birth out of the hospital has been so dampened by this like layer of like, it's not safe, and it's not a proper choice. Like the medicalization of birth has people convinced that in that sort of diluted kind of way that it's not safe. And I think it's our responsibility to articulate that choosing home birth, choosing out of hospital birth, is a place of righteous responsibility. Like that is a place, you are taking ownership, you're claiming your own sovereignty, you're making informed choices, versus having somebody kind of tell you what's the next right thing for you. And that can be uncomfortable, that place of like really feeling that level of magnitude of self-responsibility. And I think that the Western medical model of care does not instill that. It does not really give choice. It doesn't really encourage people to make their own choices. It's just like the doctor knows the best, so if you arrive, the doctor's going to tell you what he or she sort of thinks is best, versus being in a collaboration with a practitioner and moving through a process in a fluid and organic and individualized way, which is like, who are you, and what is your relationship, and what kind of meaning are you making, and how can we both get in there and like kind of comb through you, and also have you feel as connected to yourself as possible on the day that you birth. And so I think that there's like the combing through and the sort of getting rid, and then there's a lot of balming, right? A lot of healing work that we want to do to have her feel access to the parts of herself that really do know how to do this, like the return to it, where it's like, it's both like so simple and so incredibly dynamic all at the same time. And so, yeah, there's the excavation and there's the digging, and then there's also that certain point where I'm like, okay, I know in myself that as the midwife, I'm shifting her towards like filling her with light, and just with that kind of confidence around like, you have this, what makes you feel connected, what makes you feel like you have this, like get barefoot, walk around outside, like don't do anything you don't want to do, just like be in yourself and be in your body and ready for this, and just giving that space for whatever it is that she's needing to say. I always think about women when they're in their labor zone and just like that altered space, and as a midwife trying to say so little in that space because I know she's journeying and I don't want any of my words to disrupt or distract like where she's at in her own kind of medicine journey. When midwives are doing nothing, what are we really doing? We're not doing nothing at all, you know, and what it feels like to sit in a silent birth space with someone who's not asking and is actually asked for, please don't do anything. You know, that was her request essentially. And so when we are doing nothing, what are we actually doing in terms of like listening to the way that she's breathing and the tones of her breath and the sort of sensations and the quality of them and the way that the partner is sort of moving in and out and all the things that we feel in that space that is so alive and is so informing the practice of the midwife. It's like we're having our own journey, you know, kind of as all of that is happening. And I really love to, I think it's important to speak to that when a midwife is doing nothing, she's really not doing nothing.